The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. Zara Washington's eyes snapped open instantly, muscles tensing as 5 years of Marine combat training kicked in. No one called at this hour with good news. Zara speaking, she answered, voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. Ms. Washington? This is Sergeant Powell from Oak Ridge PD. There's been an incident involving your brother, Elijah. The world tilted sideways. Zara gripped the edge of her nightstand, knuckles white. What kind of incident? Her words came out razor sharp. I regret to inform you that Elijah Washington was fatally shot during a routine traffic stop. Officers report he reached for something in his vehicle after being instructed to keep his hands visible. Zara's throat closed. Elijah? Her twin? The gentlest soul she knew? That's impossible, she whispered. The department extends our deepest condolences. Zara hung up. Tears burned her eyes as she stared at the last text from Elijah, drive safe coming home next week, sis. Can't wait to see you. She wouldn't be driving home to see him. She'd be driving home to bury him. The Welcome to Oak Ridge sign looked the same as when Zara left 6 years ago, faded blue letters against chipped white paint. But everything else felt different. The weight of Elijah's absence pressed against her chest like a physical force. She parked her truck outside the police station, straightened her spine, and walked in. The desk sergeant glanced up, his expression shifting from professional to guarded when he saw her face, identical to the man whose files sat on his desk. I'm here about my brother, Elijah Washington. And you are? Staff Sergeant Zara Washington, USMC. Her military title wasn't necessary, but it was armor. The sergeant shifted uncomfortably. Chief Downing isn't available right now. I'll wait. 3 hours later, a thick-necked man with captain's bars approached. Ms. Washington, I'm Captain Reeves. Unfortunately, we can't discuss an ongoing investigation. My brother was killed 4 days ago. I want to see the body cam footage. That footage is being reviewed internally. Standard procedure. Then I want the incident report. Reeves' smile didn't reach his eyes. You'll need to file a formal request. Could take weeks to process. My brother is dead. I deserve answers. And you'll get them. When we complete our investigation. He turned to leave. We appreciate your service, Staff Sergeant. But this isn't a war zone. Let us do our jobs. The message was clear: go home, wait quietly, accept whatever they decided to tell her. Zara watched him walk away. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Ms. Washington? Zara turned to see a young woman approaching cautiously outside the convenience store where Elijah was killed. The parking lot had been scrubbed clean, but Zara could still make out the faint rust-colored stain on the asphalt. I'm Tanisha. I was here that night. Zara's pulse quickened. You saw what happened? Tanisha nodded, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Not what they're saying happened. They moved to Tanisha's car. Inside, an older man with gray-streaked dreadlocks waited. This is Mr. Jenkins. He owns the barbershop across the street. Elijah was a good boy, Mr. Jenkins said. Came in every 2 weeks, always respectful. Tell me what you saw, Zara said. Tanisha's hands trembled. Elijah had his hands on the steering wheel the whole time. Officer Beck was yelling at him, seemed angry from the start. When Elijah asked why he was being stopped, Beck pulled him out through the window. He never reached for anything? Zara asked. No, ma'am. Mr. Jenkins leaned forward. 3 officers had him pinned. He couldn't move. Then Officer Beck shouted gun and they all started shooting. There was no gun, Tanisha whispered. They planted it after. I saw them. You told this to investigators? Their silence was answer enough. The basement of Oak Ridge Public Library smelled of old paper and dust. Zara scrolled through microfiche archives of the local newspaper, noting every police incident involving black residents over the past 3 years. A pattern emerged. Traffic stops in predominantly black neighborhoods were 5 times higher than elsewhere. Arrests for minor infractions, jaywalking, loitering, broken taillights, showed similar disparities. Finding what you're looking for? Zara glanced up. An elderly librarian with kind eyes slid a manila folder across the table. Public records of settled lawsuits against the department. Never made the papers. Zara flipped through pages of legal documents. 8 settlements in 3 years, all involving excessive force claims against black citizens. Officer Beck's name appeared in 5 of them. Why help me? Zara asked. My grandson was pulled over last year. 17 years old, honor student. Spent the night in jail for resisting arrest while reaching for his registration. The librarian's voice hardened. They're protected by a system that doesn't want to see what's happening. Zara's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, parking garage. Level 3. 10 minutes. Come alone. She found a nervous young officer waiting, constantly checking over his shoulder. I was there that night, he said quietly. The dashcam footage? It's gone. Beck erased it. But there's something they don't know about. He passed her a flash drive. The convenience store camera caught everything. The rusty nail bar was dimly lit, perfect for cops wanting to drink away their shifts. Zara spotted Officer Beck immediately, crew cut, arms covered in tattoos, surrounded by fellow officers. She walked straight to their table. Conversations died as she approached. Officer Beck. I'm Elijah Washington's sister. Beck's eyes narrowed, then he forced a smile. Sorry for your loss, ma'am. I know what happened. The table went silent. Beck leaned back, his chair creaking. Do you now? Because I was there, and you weren't. 3 officers pinned down an unarmed man and shot him 7 times, Zara said evenly, feeling every eye in the bar on her. Then you planted a gun and called it self-defense. Beck stood slowly, towering over her. Careful with accusations like that. Your brother made a bad choice. Don't make one yourself. You're right about choices, Zara replied, her voice deadly calm. I chose to serve my country. Elijah chose to be a teacher. You chose to murder him. Beck stepped closer, whiskey on his breath. I'd watch your back in this town. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to shut up. Zara didn't flinch. Is that a threat, officer? Just friendly advice, he smirked. We're done here. Back in her motel room, Zara inserted the flash drive with trembling fingers. The grainy convenience store footage played, showing a perfect view of the parking lot. Elijah's sedan pulled over, brake lights glowing red. Officer Beck approached, already shouting, gun drawn. Elijah's hands never left the steering wheel, visible through the windshield. Beck yanked the door open, dragged Elijah out. 2 other officers rushed in. They forced him to the ground, knee on his neck. Elijah wasn't resisting, couldn't resist with 3 men pinning him down. Beck stepped back. Something flashed in his hand. He dropped it near Elijah's car. A gun, then Beck shouted something. All 3 officers drew their weapons. The muzzle flashes came next. 7 shots. Zara paused the video, zooming in on Beck's face, a slight smile as he planted the weapon. I've got you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She copied the file, hands steady with new resolve. This wouldn't just disappear, her brother deserved justice, and she was going to get it. The knock came past midnight, 3 sharp raps. Zara checked through the peephole, 2 uniformed officers, hands resting casually on their holsters. Ms. Washington? We need to speak with you. She opened the door but blocked the entrance. What's this about? "We've received reports of suspicious activity in this room," the taller officer said, trying to peer past her. "At midnight? Without a warrant?" The second officer stepped closer. "We understand you've been making serious allegations, accusing officers of misconduct. You're interfering with an ongoing investigation," the first added. "That could be considered obstruction." "Is collecting evidence obstruction? Or is the obstruction happening at your department?" Their professional facades cracked. "Listen carefully," the second officer hissed, jabbing a finger toward her face. "This is a small town. Things happen. Cars go off roads. Motel rooms catch fire. People disappear. You threatening me, officer? Just explaining how things work here. Back off, or learn the hard way." They left without waiting for her response, but their message was crystal clear: she was running out of time. The coffee shop 3 towns over felt safe enough for the meeting. Zara arrived early, scanning for familiar faces or police vehicles. A woman in a tailored suit arrived first, sliding into the booth without introduction. Teresa Alvarez, Deputy District Attorney. Minutes later, a tall man with graying temples joined them. Marcus Reynolds, Oak Ridge Community Coalition. "Why help me?" Zara asked bluntly. Teresa pushed a folder across the table. "Because this isn't the first time. Beck has 6 complaints of excessive force, all mysteriously cleared. The DA, my boss, keeps burying them. And because Elijah taught my daughter," Marcus added, voice breaking slightly. "He was helping black kids see themselves as scholars. His death sparked protests, but we need more than signs and chants." "I have video evidence," Zara said quietly. Teresa's eyes widened. "The convenience store footage? They told us it was corrupted." "It's not. But they'll destroy it if they know I have it." Zara leaned forward. "I need protection to release it." "I know a reporter at the Tribune," Marcus offered. Teresa nodded. "And I know which judge will issue warrants without tipping off the department." For the first time since arriving, Zara felt something beyond rage and grief. She felt hope. The town hall was packed. Mayor Clayton had called an emergency meeting to address community concerns following days of growing protests. Police lined the walls, including Beck and his partners. Zara sat quietly in the back, watching Teresa and Marcus execute their plan. "The police department has conducted a thorough investigation," Chief Downing announced from the podium. Officer Beck and his colleagues acted according to protocol when the suspect reached for what appeared to be a weapon. Marcus stood. "My organization has submitted 4 requests for body camera footage. All denied. As I've explained, that footage is part of an ongoing investigation," Downing replied smoothly. Teresa rose next. "As Deputy DA, I find it concerning that even my office hasn't been granted access to this evidence." The mayor intervened. "I assure everyone, proper procedures are being followed." That was Zara's cue. She walked to the microphone, feeling Beck's eyes burning into her. "My name is Zara Washington. My twin brother was Elijah Washington." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And this is what actually happened." The lights dimmed. On the projection screen behind the officials, the convenience store footage began playing. The room fell silent except for gasps as the truth unfolded: Elijah's compliance, Beck planting the gun, the unprovoked shooting. When the lights came up, Beck was halfway to the exit. 2 state troopers Zara hadn't noticed before blocked his path. "Officer Beck," the lead trooper announced, "you're under arrest for evidence tampering and second-degree murder." Chief Downing lunged for the podium. "This meeting is over." "Actually," Teresa said, holding up her phone, "the Attorney General's office has just opened an investigation into the entire department. Nobody leaves." The courthouse steps were crowded with cameras and protesters when the verdict came down. Zara stood stoically as the jury foreman's voice rang out. "On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant, Officer James Beck, guilty." A roar erupted from the crowd. Beck's face contorted with rage as officers led him away in handcuffs. Outside, reporters thrust microphones toward Zara. "Justice was served today," she said simply, "but one conviction doesn't fix a broken system." As the crowd dispersed, Zara noticed a familiar figure approaching, the young officer who had given her the flash drive. "They're cleaning house," he said quietly. "Internal Affairs has opened 37 cases. The chief resigned this morning." Zara nodded, feeling the weight of the past months lifting slightly. At Elijah's grave later that evening, she placed fresh flowers beside his headstone. The setting sun cast long shadows across the cemetery. "We did it, Eli," she whispered, placing her hand on the cool marble. "Your death wasn't for nothing. Things are changing." As twilight deepened, Zara remained, finally allowing herself to grieve. The fight for justice wasn't over, it never would be, but today, the system that had failed her brother had been forced to acknowledge its sins. For Elijah, and for those who would come after him, that was a beginning.